The second story, The Voyages of Dr. Dolittle. Chapter 1, The Cobbler's Son. First of all, I must tell you something about myself. My name is Tommy Stubbins, son of Jacob Stubbins, the cobbler of Puddlebury on the Marsh. And I was 9.5 years old when I first met the famous Dr. Dolittle. At that time, Puddlebury was only quite a small town. A river ran through the middle of it, and over this river there was a very old stone bridge called King's Bridge. Sailing ships came up this river from the sea and anchored near the bridge. I would sit on the river wall with my feet dangling over the water and watch the sailors unloading the ships and listen to their songs until I too could sing them by heart. When they set sail again, I longed to go with them and would sit dreaming of the wonderful lands I'd never seen. 3 great friends I had in Puddlebury in those days. One was Joe, the mussel man, who lived in a tiny hut by the edge of the water under the bridge. This old man was simply marvellous at making things. I never saw a man so clever with his hands. He used to mend my toy ships for me when I sailed upon the river. He built windmills out of packing cases and barrel staves, and he could make the most wonderful kites from old umbrellas. Another friend I had was Matthew Mugg, the cat's meat man. He was a funny old person with a bad squint. He looked rather awful, but he was really quite nice to talk to. He knew everybody in Puddlebury, and he knew all the dogs and all the cats. In those times, being a cat's meat man was a regular business, and you could see one nearly any day going through the streets with a wooden tray full of pieces of meat stuck on skewers and crying, "Meat! Meat!" People paid him to give this meat to their cats and dogs instead of feeding them on dog biscuits or the scraps from the table. My third great friend was Luke the Hermit, but of him I will tell more later on. I did not go to school because my father was not rich enough to send me, but I was extremely fond of animals, so I used to spend my time collecting birds' eggs and butterflies, fishing in the river, rambling through the countryside after blackberries and mushrooms, and helping the mussel man mend his nets. One early morning in the springtime, when I was wandering among the hills at the back of the town, I happened to come upon a hawk with a squirrel in its claws. It was standing on a rock, and the squirrel was fighting very hard for its life. The hawk was so frightened when I came upon it suddenly like this that it dropped the poor creature and flew away. I picked the squirrel up and found that 2 of its legs were badly hurt, so I carried it in my arms back to the town. When I came to the bridge, I went into the mussel man's hut and asked him if he could do anything for it. Joe put on his spectacles and examined it carefully. Then he shook his head. "Yon critter's got a broken leg," he said, "and another badly cut and all. I can mend your boats, Tom, but I haven't the tools nor the learning to make a broken squirrel seaworthy. This is a job for a surgeon, and for a right smart one and all. There be only one man I know who could save yon critter's life, and that's John Dolittle." "Who's John Dolittle?" I asked. "Is he a vet?" "No," said the mussel man, "he's no vet. Dr. Dolittle is a naturalist." "What's a naturalist?" "A naturalist," said Joe, putting away his glasses and starting to fill his pipe, "is a man who knows all about animals and butterflies and plants and rocks and all. John Dolittle is a very great naturalist." "I'm surprised you never heard of him, and you daft over animals. He knows a lot about shellfish. That I know from my own knowledge. He's a quiet man and don't talk much, but there's folks who do say he's the greatest naturalist in the world." "Where does he live?" I asked. "Over on the Oxenthorpe Road, t'other side of the town. Don't know just which house it is, but most anyone across there could tell you, I reckon. Go and see him. He's a great man." So I thanked the mussel man, took up my squirrel again, and started off towards the Oxenthorpe Road. The first thing I heard as I came into the marketplace was someone calling, "Meat, meat." "There's Matthew Mugg," I said to myself. "He'll know where the doctor lives. Matthew knows everyone." So I hurried across the marketplace and caught him up. "Matthew," I said, "do you know Dr. Dolittle?" "Do I know John Dolittle?" said he. "Well, I should think I do. I know him as well as I know my own wife. Better, I sometimes think. He's a great man, a very great man." "Can you show me where he lives?" I asked. "I want to take this squirrel to him. It has a broken leg." "Certainly," said the cat's meat man. "I'll be going right by his house directly. Come along and I'll show you." So off we went together. "Oh, I've known John Dolittle for years and years," said Matthew, as we made our way out of the marketplace. "But I'm pretty sure he ain't home just now. He's away on a voyage. But he's liable to be back any day. I'll show you his house, and then you'll know where to find him." All the way down the Oxenthorpe Road, Matthew hardly stopped talking about his great friend, Dr. John Dolittle, M.D. He talked so much that he forgot all about calling meat until we both suddenly noticed that we had a whole procession of dogs following us patiently. "Where did the doctor go on this voyage?" I asked as Matthew handed around the meat to them. "I couldn't tell you," he answered. "Nobody ever knows where he goes, nor when he's going, nor when he's going back. He lives all alone except for his pets. He's made some great voyages and some wonderful discoveries. And as for animals, well, there ain't no one knows as much about 'em as what he does." "How did he get to know so much about animals?" I asked. The cat's meat man stopped and leant down to whisper in my ear. "He talks their language," he said in a hoarse, mysterious voice. "The animals' language?" I cried. "Why, certainly," said Matthew. "All animals have some kind of a language. Some sorts talk more than others. Some only speak in sign language, like deaf and dumb. But the doctor, he understands them all, birds as well as animals. We keep it a secret, though, him and me, because folks only laugh at you when you speak of it. Why, he can even write animal language. He reads aloud to his pets. He's wrote history books in monkey talk, poetry in canary language, and comic songs for magpies to sing. It's a fact. He's now busy learning the language of the shellfish, but he says it's hard work, and he has caught some terrible colds, holding his head under water so much. He's a great man." "He certainly must be," I said. "I do wish he were home so I could meet him." "Well, there's his house, look," said the cat's meat man. "That little one at the bend in the road there, the one high up, like it was sitting on the wall above the street." We now come beyond the edge of the town, and the house that Matthew pointed out was quite a small one, standing by itself. There seemed to be a big garden around it, and this garden was much higher than the road, so you had to go up a flight of steps in the wall before you reached the front gate at the top. When we reached the house, Matthew went up the steps and I followed him. I thought he was going to go into the garden, but the gate was locked. A dog came running down from the house, and he took several pieces of meat, which the cat meat man pushed through the bars of the gate, and some paper bags full of corn and bran. I noticed that this dog did not stop to eat the meat as any ordinary dog would have done, but he took all the things back to the house and disappeared. He had a curious wide collar round his neck, which looked as though it were made of brass or something. Then we came away. "The doctor isn't back yet," said Matthew, "or the gate wouldn't be locked." "What were all those things in the paper bag you gave the dog?" I asked. "Oh, those were provisions," said Matthew, "things for the animals to eat. The doctor's house is simply full of pets. I give the things to the dog while the doctor's away, and the dog gives them to the other animals." "And what was that curious collar he was wearing around his neck?" "That's a solid gold dog collar," said Matthew. "It was given to him when he was with the doctor on one of the voyages long ago. He saved a man's life." "How long has the doctor had him?" I asked. "Oh, a long time. He's getting pretty old now. That's why the doctor doesn't take him on his voyages anymore. He leaves him behind to take care of the house. Every Monday and Thursday I bring the food to the gate here and give it to him through the bars. He never lets anyone come inside the garden while the doctor's away, not even me, although he knows me well. But you'll be able to tell if the doctor's back or not, because if he is, the gate will surely be open." So I went off home to my father's house and put my squirrel to bed in an old wooden box full of straw, and there I nursed him myself and took care of him as best I could, till the time should come when the doctor would return. And every day I went to the little house with the big garden on the edge of the town and tried to see if it were locked. Sometimes the dog Jip would come down to the gate to meet me, but though he always wagged his tail and seemed glad to see me, he never let me come inside the garden. The doctor's house. One afternoon, about a week later, my father asked me to take some shoes which he had mended to a house on the other side of town. After I'd delivered the shoes, I thought I'd just like to go and take another look, see if the doctor had returned yet. My squirrel wasn't getting any better, and I was beginning to be worried about him. I turned into the Oxenthorpe Road and started off towards the doctor's house. On the way I noticed that the sky was clouding over and that it looked as though it might rain. I reached the gate and found it still locked. I felt discouraged. The dog Jip came to the gate and watched me closely to see that I didn't get in. I began to fear that my squirrel would die before the doctor came back. I turned away sadly, went down the steps onto the road and turned towards home again. All of a sudden the rain came down in torrents. I had never seen it rain so hard. It got dark, almost like night. The wind began to blow, the thunder rolled, the lightning flashed, and in a moment the gutters of the road were flowing like a river. There was no place handy to take shelter, so I put my head down against the driving wind and started to run towards home. I hadn't gone very far when my head bumped into something soft, and I sat down suddenly on the pavement. I looked up to see whom I had run into, and there in front of me, sitting on the wet pavement like myself, was a little round man with a very kind face. He wore a shabby high hat, and in his hand he had a small black bag. "I'm very sorry," I said. "I had my head down and I didn't see you coming." To my great surprise, instead of getting angry at being knocked down, the little man began to laugh. "You know, this reminds me," he said, "of a time when I was in India. I ran full tilt into a woman in a thunderstorm, but she was carrying a pitcher of molasses on her head, and I had treacle in my hair for weeks afterwards. The flies followed me everywhere." "I didn't hurt you, did I?" "No," I said, "I'm all right." "It was just as much my fault as it was yours, you know," said the little man. "I had my head down too. But look here, we mustn't sit talking like this. You must be soaked. I know I am. How far have you got to go?" "My home is on the other side of the town," I said, as we picked ourselves up. "My goodness, but that was a wet pavement," said he, "and I can declare it's coming down worse than ever. Come along to my house and get dried. A storm like this can't last." He took hold of my hand and we started running back down the road together. As we ran, I began to wonder who this funny little man could be and where he lived. I was a perfect stranger to him, and yet he was taking me to his own home to get dried. "Here we are," he said. I looked up to see where we were and found myself back at the foot of the steps leading to the little house with the big garden. My new friend was already running up the steps and opening the gate with some keys he kept in his pocket. Surely, I thought, this cannot be the great Dr. Dolittle himself. I suppose after hearing so much about him, I had expected someone very tall and strong and marvellous. It was hard to believe that this funny little man with the kind smiling face could really be he. Yet here he was, sure enough, running up the steps and opening the very gate which I had been watching for so many days. The dog, Jip, came rushing out and started jumping up on him and barking with happiness. The rain was splashing down heavier than ever. "Are you Dr. Dolittle?" I shouted as we sped up the short garden path to the house. "Yes, I'm Dr. Dolittle," said he, opening the front door with the same bunch of keys. "Get in, don't bother about wiping your feet. Never mind the mud, take it in with you. Get in out of the rain." I popped in, he and Jip following, then he slammed the door to behind us. The storm had made it dark enough outside, but inside the house, with the door closed, it was as black as night. Then began the most extraordinary noise I'd ever heard. It sounded like all sorts and kinds of animals and birds calling and squeaking and screeching at the same time. I could hear things trundling down the stairs and hurrying along passages. Somewhere in the dark a duck was quacking, a cock was crowing, a dove was cooing, an owl was hooting, a lamb was bleating, and Jip was barking. I felt birds' wings fluttering and fanning near my face. Things kept bumping into my legs and nearly upsetting me. The whole front hall seemed to be filling up with animals. The noise, together with the roaring of the rain, was tremendous, and I was beginning to grow a little bit scared when I felt the doctor take hold of my arm and shout into my ear, "Don't be alarmed, don't be frightened. These are just some of my pets. I've been away 3 months and they're glad to see me home again. Stand still where you are till I strike a light." My gracious, what a storm! Just listen to that thunder. So there I stood in the pitch-black dark while all kinds of animals which I couldn't see chattered and jostled around me. It was a curious and a funny feeling. I had often wondered, when I had looked in the front gate, what John Dolittle would be like and what the funny little house would have inside it. But I never imagined it would be anything like this. Yet somehow, after I had felt the doctor's hand upon my arm, I was not frightened, only confused. It all seemed like some queer dream, and I was beginning to wonder if I really was awake, when I heard the doctor speaking again. "My blessed matches are all wet, they won't strike. Have you got any?" "No, I'm afraid I haven't," I called back. "Never mind," said he. "Perhaps Dab can raise us a light somewhere." Then the doctor made some funny clicking noises with his tongue, and I heard someone trundle up the stairs again and start moving about in the rooms above. Then we waited quite a while without anything happening. "Will the light be long in coming?" I asked. "Some animal is sitting on my foot, and my toes are going to sleep." "No, only a minute," said the doctor. "She'll be back in a minute." And just then I saw the first glimmerings of a light around the landing above. At once all the animals kept quiet. "I thought you lived alone," I said to the doctor. "So I do," said he. "It's Dab who is bringing the light." I looked up the stairs, trying to make out who was coming. I could not see around the landing, but I heard the most curious footstep on the upper flight. It sounded like someone hopping down from one step to the other, as though he were using only one leg. As the light came lower, it grew brighter and began to throw strange jumping shadows on the walls. "Ah, at last," said the doctor. "Good old Dab." And then I thought I really must be dreaming. For there, craning her neck around the bend of the landing, hopping down the stairs on one leg, came a spotless white duck. And in her right foot she carried a lighted candle. The doctor's kitchen. When at last I could look around me, I found that the hall was indeed simply full of animals. It seemed to me that almost every kind of creature from the countryside must be there. A pigeon, a white mouse, an owl, a badger, a jackdaw. There was even a small pig just in from the rainy garden, carefully wiping his feet on the mat, while the light from the candle glistened on his wet pink back. The doctor took the candlestick from the duck and turned to me. "Look here," he said, "you must get those wet clothes off. By the way, what is your name?" "Tommy Stubbins," I said. "Oh, are you the son of Jacob Stubbins, the shoemaker?" "Yes," I said. "Excellent bootmaker, your father," said the doctor. "You see these?" And he held up his right foot to show me the enormous boots he was wearing. "Your father made those boots 4 years ago, and I've been wearing them ever since. Perfectly wonderful boots. Well now, look here, Stubbins, you've got to change those wet things, and quick. Wait a moment till I get some more candles lit, and then we'll go upstairs and find some dry clothes. You'll have to wear an old suit of mine till we get yours dry by the kitchen fire." We changed 2 suits of the doctor's, and as soon as we had a fire blazing up the chimney, we hung our wet clothes around on chairs. "You'll stay and have supper with me, Stubbins, of course." Already I was beginning to be very fond of this funny little man who called me Stubbins instead of Tommy or Little Lad. I did so hate to be called Little Lad. This man seemed to begin right away treating me as though I were a grown-up friend of his. And when he asked me to stop and have supper with him, I felt terribly proud and happy. "Thank you very much. I would like to stay," I replied. "Did you see where I put my bag?" I asked the doctor. "I think it's still in the hall," I said. "I'll go and see." I found the bag near the front door. It was made of black leather and looked very, very old. One of its latches was broken, and it was tied up round the middle with a piece of string. "Thank you," said the doctor when I brought it to him. Was that bag all the luggage you had for your voyage?" I asked. "Yes," said the doctor, as he undid the piece of string. "I don't believe in a lot of baggage. It's such a nuisance. Life's too short to fuss with it, and it really isn't necessary, you know." Where did I put those sausages? The doctor was feeling about inside the bag. First he brought out a loaf of new bread. Next came a glass jar of marmalade, which he set upon the table. At last the doctor brought out a pound of sausages. "Now," he said, "all we want is a frying pan." We went into the scullery, and there we found some pots and pans hanging against the wall. The doctor took down the frying pan, and in a few moments the sausages were sending a beautiful smell all through the room. "Ah," said the doctor, "the sausages are done to a turn. Come along, hold your plate near and let me give you some." Then we sat down at the kitchen table and started a hearty meal. It was a wonderful kitchen, that. I had many meals there afterwards, and I found it a better place to eat in than the grandest dining room in the world. It was so cosy and homelike and warm. It was so handy for the food too. You took it right off the fire hot, put it on the table and ate it. And you could watch your toasting at the fender and see it didn't burn while you drank your soup. And if you had forgotten to put the salt on the table, you didn't have to get up and go into another room to fetch it. You just reached around and took the big wooden box off the dresser behind you. Then the fireplace, the biggest fireplace you ever saw, was like a room in itself. You could get right inside it even when the logs were burning, and sit on the wide seats either side and roast chestnuts after the meal was over, or listen to the kettle singing, or tell stories, or look at picture books by the light of the fire. It was a marvellous kitchen. It was like the doctor, comfortable, sensible, friendly and solid. While we were gobbling away, the door suddenly opened and in marched the duck, Dab-Dab, and the dog, Jip, dragging sheets and pillowcases behind them over the clean tiled floor. The doctor, seeing how surprised I was, explained, "They're just going to air the bedding for me in front of the fire. Dab-Dab is a perfect treasure of a housekeeper. She never forgets anything. I had a sister once who used to keep house for me. Poor dear Sarah. I wonder how she's getting on. Haven't seen her for many years. But she wasn't nearly as good as Dab-Dab. Have another sausage?" The doctor turned and said a few words to the dog and duck in some strange talk and signs. They seemed to understand him perfectly. "Can you talk in squirrel language?" I asked. "Oh yes, that's quite an easy language," said the doctor. "You could learn that yourself without a great deal of trouble, but why do you ask?" "Because I have a sick squirrel at home," I said. "I took it away from a hawk, for one of its legs is badly hurt, and I wanted very much to have you see it if you would. Shall I bring it tomorrow?" "Well, if its leg is badly broken, I think I had better see it tonight. It may be too late to do much, but I'll come home with you and take a look at it." So presently we felt the clothes by the fire, and mine were found to be quite dry. I took them upstairs to the bedroom and changed, and when I came down, the doctor was already waiting for me with his little black bag full of medicines and bandages. "Come along," he said. "The rain has stopped now." Outside it had grown bright again, and the evening sky was all red with the setting sun, and thrushes were singing in the garden as we opened the gate to go down onto the road. Polynesia. "It must be splendid," I said, as we set off in the direction of my home, "to be able to talk all the languages of the different animals. Do you think I could ever learn to do it?" "Oh, surely," said the doctor, "with practice. You have to be very patient, you know. You really ought to have Polynesia to start you. It was she who gave me my first lessons." "Who is Polynesia?" I asked. "Polynesia was a West African parrot I had. She isn't with me any more now," said the doctor sadly. "Why, is she dead?" "Oh no," said the doctor. "She's still living, I hope. But when we reached Africa, she seemed so glad to get back to her own country. She wept for joy. I left her in Africa. Ah, well, I have missed her terribly. She wept again when we left, but I think I did the right thing. She was one of the best friends I ever had. It was she who first gave me the idea of learning the animal languages and becoming an animal doctor. Good old Polynesia. A most extraordinary bird. Well, well." Just at that moment, we heard the noise of someone running behind us, and turning around we saw Jip the dog rushing down the road after us as fast as his legs could bring him. He seemed very excited about something, and as soon as he came up to us, he started barking and whining to the doctor in a peculiar way. Then the doctor too seemed to get all worked up and began talking and making queer signs to the dog. At length he turned to me, his face shining with happiness. "Polynesia has come back," he cried. "Imagine it. Jip says she has just arrived at the house. My, and it's 5 years since I saw her. Excuse me a minute." He turned as if to go back home, but the parrot, Polynesia, was already flying towards us. The doctor clapped his hands like a child getting a new toy, while the swarm of sparrows in the roadway fluttered, gossiping, up onto the fences. highly scandalised to see a grey and scarlet parrot skimming down an English lane. On she came, straight onto the doctor's shoulder, where she immediately began talking a steady stream in a language I could not understand. She seemed to have a terrible lot to say, and very soon the doctor had forgotten all about me and my squirrel and Jip and everything else, till at length the bird clearly asked him something about me. "Oh, excuse me, Stubbins," said the doctor. "I was so interested listening to my old friend here. We must get on and see this squirrel of yours. Polynesia, this is Thomas Stubbins." The parrot on the doctor's shoulder nodded gravely towards me and then, to my great surprise, said quite plainly in English, "How do you do? I remember the night you were born. It was a terribly cold winter. You were a very ugly baby." "Stubbins is anxious to learn animal language," said the doctor. "I was just telling him about you and the lessons you gave me when Jip ran up and told us you had arrived." "Well," said the parrot, turning to me, "I may have started the doctor learning, but I never could have done even that if he hadn't first taught me to understand what I was saying when I spoke English. You see, many parrots can talk like a person, but very few of them understand what they are saying. They just say it because they fancy it is smart, or because they know they'll get crackers given them."